She's Jazz.
He's Josh.
And you just tuned into the conversation. Hi, I'm Joshua Bolden, and welcome to the premiere of The Conversation, presented by the National Association of Black Journalists.
And I'm Jasmine Van, sitting here with our first special guest, Marcus Matthews, author of I Am Not the Father, as well as the coordinator of the largest student newspaper, the Teen Appeal, in the United States of America. How are you, Mr. Matthews?
I'm doing well. How you doing?
I'm fine. Just here ready to talk to you about this book.
Yes, I Am Not the Father. Rather very interesting book there. But before we get to the book, I want to talk to you about getting started in writing. I want to talk to you. How did you become interested in writing? Was it just innate in you? Did somebody encourage you? Well, how did that come about?
Well, my mother has always been an avid reader, and she forced us to read when we were younger. So I was always reading, and reading and writing go hand in hand. So it was really a way for me to express my thoughts. My mother also was very careful about who I hung out with and how much I hung out, even as a small child. So I spent time in the house, and since I read, I could write, and that was a way for me, to communicate.
Okay, I'm a reader as well, and I enjoy writing. So who are some of your favorite authors?
Wow, I love the autobiography of Malcolm X, as written by Alex Haley. Frankenstein is one of my favorite books by Mary Shelley. I actually taught Frankenstein when I was an English teacher. I like narratives. The narrative of Frederick Douglass is one of my favorite reads. So narratives more so. I think types of story more so than authors. So
maybe that's why you decided to write this type of book, because of some of the books that you enjoy yourself?
Yeah, definitely. The narrative of Frederick Douglass. I think the autobiography of Malcolm X was in a narrative form where he talked a lot about the things that went on in his life, and also being a journalist and having a bachelor's in journalism, storytelling, telling other people's stories. So I was able to tell my story of the false paternity accusation, and then tell other stories about the same accusation.
Okay.
Now that we have a little background about how you got started in writing, let's talk about the process of this book. Because I know it came together in a very brief couple of months. How exactly did you get the idea for I'm Not the Father? The entire book, not just your story.
Well, actually, it sprang forth from my story. It's part of my autobiography, which I'll be releasing later, about growing up in my neighborhood in Frazier in Memphis, and then becoming a doctor. But I'm not a doctor yet. So I was actually looking through my autobiography, trying to see what I could pull from the book, then to produce something now that the people could benefit from, the readers could benefit from. And I felt like this story is just a gift that keeps on giving, so to speak. I learned a lot from that situation. The gentlemen who went through this situation all learned a lot from it. So in my mind, this would be a great conversation starter to non-traditional families and traditional families. I think families think a lot about, how do we hold this birds and the bees conversation? And ideally it would be mom and dad sitting down and saying, one day you'll like a boy, or one day you'll like a girl, but oftentimes it doesn't happen that way. So I think that this was just a way to start that conversation, to give some real life concrete experiences, so that families could talk about family.
And what did your family and friends think about when you came up with this proposal for this book? You're like, Mom, I want to write this book. Hey guys, I want to write this book. What were they thinking?
Much of my family found out after the book was written. Again, like we mentioned, it was a very fast process. I'm always working. I'm a doctoral candidate. I do the student newspaper. I'm always busy. And so I basically hit the ground running. When I decided in my mind I was going to write the book, I called up the guys I text messaged the guys who I was going to interview, and we started to work. So, you know, within a month, I was done with the manuscript, and it was kind of like, hey, family, guess what I did? You know, and they were excited. They were excited just because it was my first publication. They've been reading me in newspapers, you know, for years, but this is the first one of these, so they were excited.
I'm actually curious, what were you doing the moment, because you said it happened in such a short period of time, it's kind of like maybe it was a, hey, I want to write this book. So what were you doing when you thought in your mind, I'm about to write this book?
Well, actually, Spike Lee visited the University of Memphis in late April.
Right.
And he had a talk, and he talked about being active and doing, and, you know, being proactive. Mm-hmm. And so it was that point where I knew that I would have a summer project. I didn't know what that project would be. I thought about maybe a short film or a documentary, and I had a talk with my brother, and he basically said, you know, you've been a writer your whole life, you get paid for writing, you know, write a book. And so I said, okay, well, I'll write a book. And I, again, looked through the auto, and it kind of hit us both at the same time. You know, he was like, that's a good story.
Right.
And so we were in my living room at my house, and me and my brother talking. I said, okay, you know, and the next day, I went into to my office and pulled up my auto and looked at the story and said, yeah, I think we can work with this.
Right. I actually agree when you said it's a book, it's a gift that keeps on giving, because this is not something that I think will dissipate anytime soon. I think this is a book that you can read 50 years from now and today. So, what, like, are you trying to distribute your book to certain areas, or just, you know, different? I guess maybe I'm asking, would you want more kids? Not kids, but, you know, kids our age.
What demographic?
Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Carter.
Well, I think that it's a global topic, and it's a family topic. And I think that it can be taboo to talk about sex with young people, you know, especially when you don't have that line of what's young. You know, I was 17 years old when this process started with me. I was a senior in high school when this process started with me. You know, so we're fooling ourselves as adults if we say that, you know, 15-year-olds shouldn't talk about these subjects.
I agree.
But parents, you know, do have the responsibility of rearing their own children, and they have to have those talks. So I think this is a good tool for parents to use with their minor age children. But I also think that, you know, once you are an adult, if you're 18 years old, you really can't consider yourself a child.
Right.
So this is definitely something that college campuses should embrace. I would love to see it in high schools, but
I agree.
Because when I was reading that book, I said this would be a great book for sexual education. I don't know if they teach it in Memphis.
They do.
Okay. Well, that would be a great book for them to read, because you have so many young teenage mothers walking around here going through that. Teenage mothers and fathers. One takes two.
I think it would open eyes.
It would.
Actually.
It'd make them think before. Yeah, so it should be, and I think it should be in schools.
Well, I think one of the interesting aspects of the book is that it's just as informative, if not more informative, as it is entertaining. Right. You know, I think initially there's a shock value. You know, you look at the picture and you see the guy with his face. You know, I'm not the father. And you think about what you see on TV and what you hear on the radio, and you think it's laughable. But when you actually get into these stories and you hear about what these young men have gone through and how this affects not only the man, but it also affects their child who may not ever know who their father is. It affects the families, because these families often embrace these children. You know, one of the gentlemen, his mother was very attached to the little girl that she thought was her granddaughter. Right. You know, and then the paternity test says no, it's not. So it's very informative. It has a high educational value because it's practical. You know, it is true stories from real people about things that are really going on in life. And you talked about 50 years from now. Michael Jackson performed Billie Jean in 1983. Billie Jean is one of the top pop songs of all time. What is Billie Jean about?
Right.
You know, she says, I am the one, the kid is not my son. So the song is about a false paternity claim.
Right.
You know, and there are TV and radio programs about false paternity claims. So it's a family issue, it's a global issue, it's an issue that was around before Billie Jean.
Right.
You know, it is an issue that will continue to be around. And this is the first book about false paternity claims. So, I mean, if you look at it from that perspective, you know, it's a really big deal from that aspect.
And I would say that the book goes deeper than anything else. The book can go deeper than a song. The book can go deeper than the Maury Povich Show. Let's just go ahead and say the Maury Povich Show, because that's what we all have in our minds when we pick up. I picked it up and I'm thinking, oh, okay, we're gonna have it's gonna be a little entertainment here. When I opened up that book and it said the names have been changed to protect the, I was like, dang, it just kind of hit me.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, this is going to be deep. And then I get to reading, and there's some little entertaining moments in there. Like when you say you had to go buy your own phone, all right, and your mom said, I love your mom. Okay, I do too. I mean, she's old school. And she said, I don't want you talking on the phone late night because it leads to desires.
Right. And she's right. She was right.
And I was like, that's an old school comment right there.
Yeah, and it's an old school concept. It's an old school concept. And there's a lot of, you know, old adages and old wisdom that, you know, I got from my parents and my grandparents that you know, I mentioned.
Which helps because you don't get that old wisdom a lot these days. With children that are being raised, you don't get that old wisdom. And that helps you in the long run also.
As many times have you been raised by children themselves?
Yeah, I think we have to continue to bridge those small gaps. And I think, you know, there's a gap between a high schooler and a middle schooler. Mm-hmm. There's room in between where the high school kids say, man, you're in middle school. Yeah. And then between the college students and the high school students, there's a gap. And then there's also a gap between those young adults and those older adults where, you know, I don't know when it happens because I don't have children.
Right.
But at some point, many older adults say, oh, my kid doesn't think that way. My kid's not involved with that. My kid doesn't need to hear about that. And one of another old adage, this isn't from my mom, it's from a mentor. She says, anything one child would, my child, oh my gosh, I can't get it right. Oh man.
I think I'm here with you.
It's something to the extent that anything one child might do, my child might do too. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I think that, you know, it's very true, and I think some parents don't want to come to grip with it. You know, all the other kids may try X, Y, and Z, but my child won't try it.
Right.
You know, and I think we're fooling ourselves. And this is a great way to bridge that gap. I had a mother and daughter to read the book. And the mother said, you know, I never even considered this topic. I never even thought about the fact that a woman may claim that someone is the father who's not.
Right.
And her daughter read the book. She bought it, read it, and bought it for her daughter. And the daughter said, this happens all the time, Mom. You know, I know, I got friends who have been in this situation. So for them, that was a way for them to connect and to be able to talk about things that go on in the community and things that go on with individuals and inside their own family and circle of friends.
That's another reason why I like this book, because it's real. It's not you telling a story just off the top of your head. It's a real life story. And I think when stories are true, it makes people think more rather than just fiction. Because when I read it, I'm like the daughter. This happens all the time. You know what I mean? But if I was reading it as fiction, or, you know, it just made a difference. It being real life, it made a difference.
Go ahead.
No, I talked to a school teacher, an English teacher, high school teacher, and she suggested that I fictionalize the book and water down the language so that students would read it. And I really had a problem with that idea. Maybe adjusting a little language, maybe. But definitely not fictionalizing it, because students are going to say, this ain't real.
Right.
You know,
this happened to me.
He just made this up. This is something he made up.
Exactly.
You know, but these are true stories from real people. And all except for one were fine with me even sharing their identity. So it's not like these people are hiding. You know, these are people who are willing to talk about the situation. So I think that definitely is a strong point.
And another thing I want to note about the book, the book is told from different perspectives. So all the men in this book are different ages. So you were 17, and then you have a couple of gentlemen in their 20s and 30s and stuff. So it's told from a different perspective, so everyone can kind of relate to it. And I'm gonna say the book really clicked for me when I realized these are real people. When I got to chapter 3, about Eric, it was Eric, and he's an entrepreneur, and I was like, darn, this sounds like somebody I know. These sound like people I would run into on a daily basis. Because Eric was the high school was with the high school sweetheart, and I was like, oh my gosh. I know these people, and it just kind of clicked once you started talking about Eric and you started mentioning Memphis and Celebration Station, and I started identifying with all these different places. I'm like, okay, this is a real story here, and then I just continued reading on, and it's real.
It's amazing. I can remember when Eric was going through the situation. I remember being at his house, at his apartment, when he had his head in his hands and his eyes were red, and again, this is his high school sweetheart, and he wanted this to be his son. Right. He had every intention of taking care of the child, and he was paying bills, and he was being there, but he had that doubt. And he acted on that doubt. He followed his heart, which was his advice in the book, to follow your heart. And he found out that the child was not his. And I tried to capture that. I tried to capture, his emotions, his feelings. And you mentioned the ages. I started, my situation started when I was 17. And I think the oldest situation started when the guy was 26. But the time between getting the results and being a part of the book, I think that's interesting too, because you have me with 12 years of separation, and then you have Chip, our youngest character, who got his results within 6 months of being interviewed. So he was so emotional.
So the reactions don't be different.
Exactly, and just that reaction, that emotion of just finding out. Actually, he came to pick up a copy of the book from my house. I called him, I said, the book's here. He said, I'm on the way. And he said, man, I'm still struggling because I'm finding baby clothes around my house. I'm finding items that belong to the child who was named after me. And so he was still struggling with it. And then for some of us to have a little separation from it, to have had that time to heal a little bit, right. I think that really gives good perspective in the book.
Each situation, the range to which, I guess it's different because everyone's different. But when I'm reading the book, the range of what these men had to go through, Chip, I was upset because this man met the real baby daddy. Okay, she introduced him as the cousin. I had issues with that, and I was like, oh my gosh, you can't do that. And then here comes Chip, and he sees it. And I don't want to give the whole chapter away, excuse me, but
it's compelling. There's some very compelling stories, and that's why I wanted to share them. And that's the reaction I want. I want people to talk about it and for conversations to start. And another aspect of it is the fact that it's not just the conversation about men who are falsely accused. Women have read my book and say, okay, when are you going to do You Are the Father for the men who are having these children and they're not taking care of them? Or when are you going to do, the book about the man who steps in as a stepfather and takes care of children that aren't his? Or what about this family? So it's starting that conversation about family, and it's also bringing to light so many situations that we have to deal with in real life. There are stepfathers out there. There are stepmothers out there. It's more than just, you know, the Huxtable family,
Right.
you know, right now in our society. We have to address it so that we can learn how to best deal with it.
Right.
You know, it's not about casting judgment on any situation. It's about saying, okay, this is the situation that you're in. This is the situation that you're in. This is my situation. How do we make the best of these situations? You know, so I'm really pleased about, you know, the conversations that are coming from the stories in the book.
Okay, and now that we've talked about the process, let's go ahead and we can talk about the process of it all day. Really, because it's a great book, and let's talk about one of the chapters in the book. All right, your chapter, your story. In your story, I don't want to give it all away, but like you said, it starts at 17, and you tell the story. You tell the story well, and you tell about how your father. You're sitting on the porch, and it's raining, and I can picture all that in my head. And here comes your father up on the porch, and I'm like, oh, he's going to get, you know, roasted, you know, scorn roasted, and I picture it. I don't even know what your father sounds like, but I picture your father just says it in a deep voice, and he says something to the effect of, "It is what it is. It's done." Right? And I'm like, "Oh, that is the worst. That is the worst way." Because I'm thinking, you know, the best situation was, you know, he comes, you know, consoles you, pat you on the back. But you know, the worst, that right there. I was like, "Oh." That kind of hurt.
That was tough. That was tough. But that was, you know, my father is a very poignant man. He's brilliant, but he's sharp, and he doesn't hold any punches back. So, you know, the situation there was, I was on the porch, almost in tears, thinking, okay, I'm 17 years old. I'm supposed to be getting ready for college. How am I going to take care of a child? You know, what's going to happen to my life? What about my scholarship? You know, and he said, "No use crying now. You did it." And that was the point where I told him, you know, "Pop, I used the condom." He said, "Every time?" I said, "Yeah. We only did it once."
Right.
Yeah. And then his response, of course, "That ain't your baby," you know. So, my story, it is sensitive though, because of the tragedy that's involved in the story, and that's really the only reason why I felt that there are some general conversational. There's a general tone there. I don't talk about who she is specifically because you know who I am specifically. So I definitely keep her identity out of it, and to a degree, I don't go more than what's in the book about my situation,
right?
Because of, you know, the tragedy in her family.
I completely understand that some things should, you know, remain private. Now, we talk about your father. All right, and you talk about your mom in the book and how, you know, she says it leads to desires, which she's right. Do you think that your mother knew what you were doing? Because when a mother knows a lot of things. Mothers know a lot of things, and they just keep quiet. And I read, you know, in the book you say the only time you had time to do anything, because your mother was a stay-at-home mom, was on Thursday nights at Bible study. I was like, Bible study? No.
Yeah, my mom would go to Bible study on Thursdays, so that was my time. Really, I was an athlete too, so, you know, that would be my excuse after basketball practice. You know, I could go and, you know, rip and run a little bit with the fellas, and then, you know, when she would go away. And it's funny, you asked a good question. You asked questions that lead to good stories. I gave my mom a copy of the book, of course, and she started reading it, and she's on the phone with my brother, and I can hear her through the phone, and she's like, "I didn't know Marcus was having sex at 15. And my brother is an instigator, so he's like, "Mom, that boy was just cutting up. Ooh, you just didn't know what he was getting into." And it is funny. So yeah, she did definitely learn some things about me, and I think that it's just typical of parent-child relationships. You know, I'm 30 years old now. My mom didn't know what I was doing every moment when I was 15 years old. No parent knows everything that their 15-year-old child is doing, and if you think you do, then you sadly mistake.
Right, right.
So I think a tool like this helps to start that conversation, because I got on the phone with my mom after she talked to my brother, and I was like, yeah, Mom, but the book isn't about that. The book's about some other stuff. But yeah, definitely.
So you also think this book can maybe be used as a guide for parents too? Like you said, if they think they know everything, not as a way to tell them, get into your child's business, hassle them all the time, but maybe to not be so naive and maybe ask a couple more questions after reading a book like this.
And know what's going on. You just have to know what. If you're a parent, you need to know what people your child's age are doing. You don't have to know everything your child is doing.
Right.
But if all the 17-year-olds in your neighborhood are engaged in an activity and you can see it, then that's a conversation you may want to hold with your child.
Right.
Even if you're not saying that they're doing it or you haven't seen them do it, it's just a conversation. And I think, just holding conversations is a lot. That's a great way to lead towards healing in situations. It's a great way to lead towards just being on the same page.
You're right about that. Definitely right about that.
All right. Now we're going to get a little deeper. All right. And I kind of want to touch on this. Considering this happened when we were 17, it's now 2010. The girl would be about 12 or 13 years old. If she wanted to meet you, would you be up for that meeting?
Yeah, I would, and I would have to be honest with her, and certainly say that I am not your father. As we had a DNA test. I had a relationship with your mother. She was a wonderful person. She was a nice, smart, pretty, gentle girl,
right.
And I am not your father, but I do know your mother, and I don't know what else I would be able to offer, but I used to wonder, I used to think years back that, one day somebody's going to come knocking at my door, and say, hey, Daddy,
right.
I did think about that, when I was younger.
And when this situation, when the tragedy struck, when the tragedy struck and you thought, okay, this child may not know her father, right? And this child will hear anecdotes about her mother, but she won't know her mother. Did you ever, I wonder this with each paternity case, did you want to be the father? Did you, like after the fact, did you say, oh, I wish I was a father, so that child could have somebody in their life, concretely know that somebody was in their life?
I was taken by so many emotions through the entire process. I think starting with surprise, when I got, hey, guess what? That surprise leading to confusion, leading to curiosity about how on earth can someone get pregnant after one encounter with the condom. And then dealing with, as I talked a little bit about her family and their believing her claim, and me dealing with her family and that stress. There was a lot of stress involved, a lot of emotion, and then to top it off, her dying in a tragic way. It was very sad then. It's very sad now, and my condolences and my heart go out to her family and the child. And I remember standing in the courtroom when the paternity results were being issued out, and of course she wasn't there to stand before the judge. And I hear Marcus L. Matthews, in the case of said child, you are not the father. You have been excluded as the father of said child. You are free to go. And I was standing there not knowing what to do, where to go. I was 18 at this point. A freshman in college here at the University of Memphis. And there were so many emotions and so many things I thought about. So it's very difficult to just pin one frame of mind, because this is a situation that when people read the book, they say, I never thought about that. You know, I never thought about the fact that a man can be emotionally scarred. You know, I never thought about the fact that this could look, you know, this could be why you don't trust someone totally in your next relationship. You know, and there's so many different emotions. You know, of course, initially I thought, you know, I had become attached to the child. To answer your question, I had become attached to her. You know, she was just a beautiful little girl. And fortunately for me, we got the results early. You know, and I came around. Her family extended an invitation. You know, come around whenever you want to. But it was a very sticky situation, a very tough situation, with all the stress and the heartache, and you know, the family all not knowing about the paternity test, and you know, it was a very difficult situation for me to just stand there and be a part of at such a young age. There was so much stress in my life at that time.
So you're saying because you found out early enough. Was it easier for you to detach yourself because you found out early enough?
Most definitely. There are situations where men find out that they are not the biological father, and they stick around, you know, for the sake of the relationship, for the sake of the child. You know, it happens often too. So it wasn't my scenario. The gentleman in the book, they severed those relationships with those women, and they don't serve as fathers to those children. You know, and that's another conversation about, you know, how should that situation be dealt with? What is the man's role, you know, in that situation? Do you, you know, hang around a woman who you know has lied to you on a very deep level, and raise a child that's not biologically your child, and deal with the stress of their relationship and the doubt and those things, or do you walk away and try to find another relationship? There are a lot of conversations in this.
And do you think it was hard on your family because they had met the child? Do you think it was harder on them or you?
It was harder on me. I can't say harder. I really can't say, because it's hard for me to measure just the benefit of getting the results so soon. Like in other cases, you know, where the child was a part of another family for 2 years, and you know, the grandmother's babysitting, and you have that kind of relationship where the whole family is embracing this child, and then, you know, as in Chip's story, you know, when the small kids start to ask you, how you not the daddy no more?
Right.
How did I your baby no more?
Right.
And, you know, these are, you know, 8-year-old kids asking regular questions that make sense.
Yeah.
You know, so those are the kind of things that...
Yeah.
So after this entire situation, after it was all said and done, is it harder for you? Because I know you said, like, we don't expect men to have trust issues and emotional issues. So has that carried on even present day? Do you still have the same? Do you have trust issues? Are you more cautious? A lot more cautious? Are you just on your P's and Q's like to no other right now?
I'm definitely cautious, and you know, I would encourage everyone to be careful in relationships. You know, just the things that you say, and being honest, you can't discount that. Regardless of the type of relationship that you have, whether it's, you know, monogamous, we're going to get married one day, or we have drinks and we hang out and we have fun, whatever that is, be honest about it, you know, and be forthright about it. I think that's the best advice, you know, for anybody. And not to say that, you know, her lie was the only lie I ever told. I've been in relationships where I have been untruthful, so, you know, and I think everyone can kind of go back and say, okay, well, yeah, I've lied before,
right.
You know, but you want to try to be as open and honest as possible. And yeah, I've definitely become more careful. I met with ladies of the Round Table Book Club. They were wonderful. Mm-hmm. And one of the members brought up a point where I said that in the future, I could see myself asking my wife or having a paternity test even if I was married. Mm-hmm. And she said, how could you test a child in a marriage? You know, there's no way you can justify that. I was damaged, you know. Right. And so I don't think that you can measure how hurt a person is or how a person deals with hurt. And this was actually a good tool for me to come to grips with the fact that, you know, dude, you know, everybody's not gonna lie to you. Everybody's not.
Okay.
You know.
I understand that.
Because I was wondering, because when I read it, I was thinking, okay, well, future relationships with women, how is he going to let that guard down?
Right.
And, I mean, he's got his guard up, but then you got to let it down a little bit, just, I was like, is that possible? You can't have it both ways.
Right.
And I'm like, how's that going to,
Well, I have been married and divorced.
Okay.
And I will hopefully marry, again for good. And, in my mind, I would see myself marrying a woman who is very, very considerate and thoughtful enough to say, okay, this is what you've been through, and I can understand how this could really make you react a certain way. It's the same way with anything in a relationship where you have someone who's been through a traumatic instance. If someone lost their father in death, my ex-wife lost her father in a motorcycle accident. Mm-hmm. She didn't want me to ride a motorcycle. It makes sense.
You're being sympathetic to her.
And there are all kind of scenarios out there. You have, men and women who've been sexually abused, who've been physically abused, and you go into that relationship, you have to respect the fact that, okay, this person has been sexually abused. So, I don't know how it's going to play out, but I have to be prepared for that, and we have to be able to talk about it, if they're uncomfortable with a situation or not. And I think it's the same for guys. We should get that allowance too, okay, this guy had somebody accuse him of paternity, so he may be a little touchy on some subjects. He may, not. It may take him a little time to really open up. So, hopefully, I'm sure, I know there are women out there who can deal with that kind of situation.
Well, our last question. I think this is going to be our last question. This is the conversation. Sparks conversation, sparks questions, sparks curiosity. There are a lot of points in that book. There are a lot of stories in that book, and it brings about a lot of questions. More questions than we've asked. More questions than we can have in this interview. What do you think is the most important point you want people, men, women, children, to get out of that book?
We have to think more. We have to be thoughtful, and we have to think in advance. And this is something that I have to practice. It's something that takes practice, but we have to start thinking more in advance. And we also, for parents, they have to think in advance for their children. They have to think in advance. And what I mean when I say that is, if you have a child, eventually they'll be ready to date somebody. Right. So in advance, how about we have this conversation? If you're sexually active, then okay, there's a possibility of pregnancy. Or if you are pregnant, or if you're having unprotected sex, especially if you're having unprotected sex and with more than one person, okay, thinking in advance here, there could be a real problem. Right. So either I need to change my activity, or I'm going to have to be real honest with some people. So just thinking in advance to say, all right, this might lead to this, so here's a preventive measure.
All right. Well, I think that's all I have. You have anything else to?
That would have been my last question. That's all I have. You definitely given us a good debut. I can tell you that much for sure.
Very good debut. And let me also know, because he doesn't know this and you don't know this.
Okay.
This is the debut, and in coming up with the title for this show, because I actually told you about this a long time ago. It was last year, and I was telling you about the proposal for the show, and I had ideas like Memphis Today, Hey Memphis, and you came up to me and you said, "What is the show going to be about?" And I said, well, the show's about conversation, the conversation about Memphis. And you just kept saying, okay, the conversation is about Memphis, and you just kept saying the conversation. And then it just sort of clicked. Let me go ahead and change the title to The Conversation, and I think it fits. I like it. And so you're sitting with the man who came up with
the conversation.
Right, the conversation. The title.
I'm a moniker maker. Actually, I wrote the moniker for the teen appeal, giving Truth to Memphis Youth. I wrote that moniker.
Right.
I'm a member of the Journalism Alumni Club, and we have a program that's designed to help our students in the program, and we're going to call it Write Shop, WRITE Shop. I wrote that moniker. So yeah, I've kind of been a moniker man. And I do want to mention that the book is available at Davis Kid Bookstore and Poplar and Perkins, and it's also available at my website, MarcusLMatthews.com, and the book's only $12.
Of course. And I also had another question, last question. What's the future? What's after I'm Not the Father?
Well, I am a doctoral candidate, which keeps me busy.
Right.
I also work full time, but I've been approached about doing more with the book. I've been approached about a stage play. I've been approached about a documentary. I've been approached about a possible movie.
Great ideas.
So
I will watch every last one.
So right now, I'm focusing back on my studies, and hopefully I will have a very concrete offer with very solid resources. That's what I'm really looking for. I've been approached by local entrepreneurs and local film people and local people. And I don't know their resources. That's one of the things that we'll talk about in the talks. But I think that this is such a global issue. It's such a big deal that there will be more opportunities with great resources to expand on this. So, I'm holding my hat and saying, okay, I'm in school. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, something better pop off.
Yeah.
And if not, then I got a year to I'll do it myself.
Thank you so much for being here first.
Yes, thank you so much. This has been fun.
It has been good.
I enjoyed myself.
And, pick up I'm Not the Father on what is it?
Davis Kid Booksellers.
Davis Kid Booksellers.
$12.
MarcusLMatthews.com.
I'm impressed, guys. Good job.
Thanks.
You did it. Oh my God. Amen. Yes. All right.